So we have people here so far, in addition to candidate Micah, from Central Park Gardens, and I'm the head of that tenant association. We have a few tenants from there. We have people from RNA houses. We have and the head of the tenant association, Jay Haugen, and we have Joan and Barry Cohn of St. Martin's. Is that right? I'm always
Yes.
Okay, St. Martin's, which is a Rachel Lama co-op, and we have Pat Laughlin, the main organizer here, who is the head of the Tenant Association of Park West Village Tenants. And am I missing any? And Jane Clark, who is from
Westgate
Tenant Association. So we're up to 32 participants. Not bad, folks. Okay, and we have tenants from all of these buildings. So this is a nice group. What we'd like to do, I'm going to introduce the candidate, and we've given them a bunch of topics to talk about, to touch on in their time. We're hoping that each candidate will speak for 10 or 15 minutes and then answer questions from us and from you all. Okay, so Micah Lasher, who I confess I've known for many years, because he is just a year behind my daughter, and he and my in high school, and he and my daughter kind of overlapped working for various political candidates over the years. And Micah he was until January director of policy for New York State and worked for Governor Hochul and worked on gun safety and protecting abortion providers and patients. I'm reading this from his website. Indexing the minimum wage to inflation, more construction and tackling exclusionary zoning. He's been an aide to Congressman Nadler. He's worked on virtually every politician's campaign for the Upper West Side and has their endorsements. And he was also a chief of staff to the New York Attorney General. So we've asked the candidates to talk about housing and what they liked and didn't like and would want in the state budget. We've asked them to talk about schools, safety, utilities. They want to talk about other things like gun safety or, other issues. Feel free. The floor is yours. Go.
All right. Well, Sue, thank you so much, and Pat, and to everybody for taking the time. I'm glad to see everybody here, for those folks whom I already know, and folks that I'm going to get to know for the first time. So I really appreciate it. My name is Micah Lasher. I'm running to succeed Danny O'Donnell in the State Assembly after 22 years. I was born and raised on the West Side, raising 3 kids here. They are 13, 11, and 8. And there is no issue, I think, more important to me and to the community than making sure that New York City and this neighborhood can still be a place where people can afford to live with modest means. And that is certainly a dynamic that is increasingly threatened by the enormous economic squeeze that people are facing. And I thought I would just talk, Sue, there were a lot of topics on that list. I thought in my sort of opening comments, I would really focus on housing, and then perhaps we could get into some other issues with whatever time we have left. I have worked on housing and tenant issues for a very long time. One of my very first political activities was in 1996, phone banking at the 1199 headquarters against the Republican proposal to expand decontrol in the rent law fight that was happening in that year as the rent laws were set to expire. These were back in the days of Joe Bruno running the state Senate for the Republicans. I've testified and I have participated in protests at RGB hearings over the years against rent increases. I worked as an aide to Congressman Nadler to fight the sale of Trinity Towers to, I believe it was private equity at the time. And I began work in Congressman Nadler's office that carried over my time in city government, where I was director of state legislative affairs, fighting the scourge of illegal hotels and later Airbnbs that were taking thousands of affordable housing units off the market. And I'm particularly proud of the work that I helped drive in the Attorney General's office. We started a city and state tenant harassment prevention task force. We returned 1,800 apartments across 128 buildings back into rent stabilization. We introduced legislation to make it easier to criminally prosecute landlords. And in fact, just this week, that legislation, which later became law, was used to bring a case against Oheb Shalom, who's one of the city's most notorious landlords. And while I should say I did not always agree with the direction that things have gone in Albany over the last few years, I was very proud to be part of putting together, in my work for the state, the largest affordable housing capital plan in the state's history, $4.5 billion over 5 years. And I think that the big question facing the legislature and facing our next assembly member is, where do we go from here? We had I think, to put it kindly, a very messy budget deal that may have some effect on the creation of new housing, but is unlikely to have much of an effect on the creation of affordable housing, may have a negative effect on the preservation of affordable housing. And so the real question is, where do we go from here? And I want to talk, forgive me, about 8 things. First, affordable housing preservation. It is very expensive to create new affordable housing. It is almost always less expensive to preserve the affordable housing that we have. So whether that is Mitchell-Lama housing, HDFC housing, rent stabilized housing, government should be sparing no expense or effort in making sure that we do not lose existing affordable units to privatization, to luxury rents, and make sure that this stock remains in good shape. So that means investment, it means oversight of the folks that own this stock of housing, and it means preserving every unit we possibly have. 2, I think we need to invest and beef up enforcement of our housing laws at DHCR, also at city agencies, but I'm running obviously for state office. I think that becomes all the more important after this budget deal, where certainly there is the potential for increased incentives for landlords to mess around on IAIs and the like. Third, and I think this is incredibly important, is I think we need to make housing access vouchers a policy reality in the state of New York. It has been something that has been proposed for many years. There is a massive waiting list for Section 8, and it makes all the sense in the world. Again, it is a cost-effective strategy. So if you use a housing access voucher to keep somebody in their home, that is, in addition to being a much better policy outcome, it is a much better fiscal outcome than trying to create a new unit of housing for them. And likewise, it is going to be less expensive to give somebody a housing voucher than to add a shelter bed in the homeless system, and obviously a much more humane and better outcome for that New Yorker. So this has been something that Linda Rosenthal and Brian Kavanaugh have been proposing. I think it has sort of not quite gotten prime time attention because of other battles in Albany, but I very much want to give it that. Transit-oriented development is an area that I have worked on over the last couple of years, and I think is something we need to focus on. There are a lot of places, both in the city and in the region, where that are transit accessible, and there is very little multifamily housing, where multifamily housing can be built to relieve pressure on the housing stock that exists. And the reason it doesn't fundamentally is because of exclusionary zoning that is modern day redlining. And I think that is something that is long overdue to be taken on. I think we need to look at some kind of social housing model that can build middle and low income housing on a rational basis. That is a tough nut to crack. I've discussed this with some of the folks on this Zoom, and I continue to talk to experts about what a model might look like that would be financially sustainable. There is a model that has been pioneered in Montgomery County that involves the creation of a public revolving fund that basically takes the place of private equity investment in housing development, and that once the buildings are built, the funds cycle back into the public fund. And what it ostensibly enables is the use of a manageable amount of public resources to create middle and low income housing. I think there are questions about whether this model will work in New York, but there are very smart people that I respect, that I've talked to, who believe that it can, and that is very much something that I want to pursue. I believe we need to expand legal representation for tenants. That we know that the rate of eviction when a tenant is represented goes way down. And that is, I think, an important tool that we can provide. There's obviously been progress made in terms of right to counsel at the city level, but legal representation is still dramatically underfunded at the state level, particularly once you get outside of New York City. And I think that is something that the state should work on. And also outside of New York City, I think the one-shot deals that we have in New York City to stave off eviction should be made available to people outside of New York City. That can be done at a very manageable expense, and it will keep a lot of people in their home. And finally, the New York City Housing Authority. New York City Housing Authority, if it were a private landlord, would be considered one of the worst landlords in the city of New York. That is both a result of massive management and operational failures. It's also a result of neglect and underfunding by all three levels of government for a very, very long time. There is no magic bullet. I see Carmen is here. She knows more about this issue than I ever will. So I want to respect that, but I will simply say that I will be a champion for oversight of the Housing Authority, for increased funding at the state level for both what tenants need and for the government agency. And also as a local assembly member, I'll be an advocate for every individual tenant that has a challenge facing in NYCHA. And I just want to close with a personal sort of arc that kind of gives you a sense of my perspective on this. When I went to NYU, when I graduated from NYU, I unwittingly leased an apartment from Steve Croman, who, as some of you may know, is one of the worst landlords in the city. And how, I think we did have Google at that point, and how I didn't, I thought I was already working in politics. How I didn't figure that out on the front end, I don't know, but I didn't. And we had an electrical fire in our apartment, and he refused to return our security deposit, my roommates and I. And so we sued him. We represented ourselves pro se, and he had a legal team that seemed to live in the courthouse, and it required many trips to court, and it came this close to getting dismissed on a technical issue. And at the kind of the last minute, I made an appeal on the basic merits of it to the judge, and the judge awarded us the full amount that we were seeking, which Croman refused to pay. And we had to send lien letters to his banks. And we did this all ourselves, I should say, by the way. This was all pro se. And finally, he agreed to pay the judgment in exchange for us vacating the verdict, because at the end of the day, he didn't care about the few $1,000s that he owed us. He didn't want a record of how many of these cases existed. Fast forward 15 years, I'm the chief of staff in the state attorney general's office. I'm at the summer barbecue and I'm talking to a young lawyer, and I asked her what she's working on. And she says she's doing a civil investigation of a landlord who's seems like a really bad guy. And I said, who's the landlord? And she says, Steve Croman. And I said, well, I wouldn't want to put my thumb on the scale, but what I can tell you is whatever you think is there, there's more. And we certainly supported a fulsome investigation, which led to one of the first criminal prosecutions of a landlord for tenant harassment. And Steve Croman did not enough time on Rikers Island. And I share that sort of arc with you because I have both a personal understanding of these issues, and and a commitment to these issues, but I also have serious professional experience in government dealing with these issues at a very high level. And I think that there are a number of candidates in this race. I think we all share a similar set of values. I think we all share a deep commitment. I certainly do, a deep personal commitment to people who need help, who don't have power or money or advantage. But I think what I bring to this is not just that personal commitment, but a lot of experience figuring out how to get things done in government. And I'll bring that to bear, not just for this community, but I think this community has a long history of sending people to Albany that speak with a broader perspective, and I would bring that to the job. And so that's me. And I would truly be grateful for whatever questions people have or other topics that we want to talk about.
So if you can raise your hand on Zoom or raise your hand in the screen, and I'm only seeing one screen at a time. So we have one. Okay, so Dean Heitner is first, and you're from Park West Village Tenant Association. Can you unmute yourself?
Just did.
Okay.
Hey, Dean.
Hello, Micah. How are you?
Good.
Just a quick question about one of your 8 items. You were discussing public funding, and I just want to understand a little bit more about that works. You said that somehow the idea was to get a fund, use it to build, develop, and somehow that money was going to be funneled back.
Yeah. So
mechanism. How does that?
So I will do my best to explain this with the stipulation that I'm not a housing finance expert, and I have spent now several hours on Zooms with people who are trying to understand it. I will give you a poorer version of that. When you look at mixed income development, right, your typical 80-20 or 70-30 deal, right? How do those deals happen? Well, first of all, you have the market rate units cross-subsidizing the affordable units. That's part of how it happens, right? Maybe you have some government tax credits, LIHTC tax credits. Maybe you have a state funds from HPD, or excuse me, city funds from HPD or state funds from DHCR. And then what you have fundamentally is a mix of private equity investment constituting somewhere between 10 and 20% of the deal, and then private debt, right? And the private investment expects a significant return, right? A 20%. Sue and I talked about this a little bit. I went back, did some more homework. So something like on the equity piece, the overall return on the deal is like 6 or 7%, but the equity piece expects like a 20% internal rate of return. And also it limits the amount of debt that will finance the deal. So the idea that they have pioneered in Montgomery County, Maryland, is they've issued a bond to create a revolving loan fund. And what that fund does is it replaces with public dollars that 10 to 20% of equity in the deal. And apparently what I'm told is that with public dollars, you can actually reduce the amount of equity that's expected. Debt will cover a greater percentage of the deal. What that does, again, I'm told, is reduce the overall costs of capital on the deal. So it makes the overall development of the housing less expensive. So you can take what might be an 80-20 deal and it can become a 60-40 deal, or even maybe a 50-50 deal. What might have been a fully market rate development because there was no other government funding might become an 80-20 deal. So that money gets put into the deal for the private equity instead of the private equity piece. The building gets built, the apartments get leased out, and at that point, apparently, normally what happens in a private deal is the private equity then sells and gets replaced, and it gets taken out and gets replaced with debt. So here, the public dollars would then come out and be replaced with debt at a much lower interest rate because the building is leased out, and those public dollars get put back into the fund to do the next deal. That is the idea. And so basically you end up with without a kind of private equity ownership piece of the deal and a much lower cost of capital. I'm not doing justice to this. I'm giving you a layman's regurgitation, but I will just tell. So I think this has promise, and again, they're doing it in Montgomery County, and there's been a big piece in the Times about it, and I've spoken to some of the experts on it, and I share it with you, not because I necessarily know that that is the answer, but I take this stuff very seriously. I take the work of government and policy very seriously, and I will work very hard to think through, identify, and implement serious solutions to these issues, not just say the buzzwords, but actually try to figure out how we deliver on them.
No, you explained that very well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Joyce, you're next. Joyce Bielek. Joyce, you're muted. You are.
Unmute and on video. So I think what you were talking about, funding in the Montgomery County method, could overlap with a project that some community groups in New York City are increasingly working on, namely community land trusts, whereby land that is not currently being used would be developed by community groups, not from a profit point of view, but based on the needs of the community to create truly affordable housing. And so this has been a city effort. I wonder if you're familiar with the Community Land Trust and whether you think that the Montgomery County funding method could help to fund such housing.
Thank you for the question, Joyce. The short answer is yes and yes. And I should say, in the sort of litany of stuff that I threw at everybody at the beginning, one of the things I left off, when I was in the Attorney General's office, we had hundreds of millions of dollars coming to us from settlements from the big financial institutions for the residential mortgage-backed security crisis. And we spent a bunch of that money on land banks in upstate cities that are very similar to the community land trust model. And I think it is a very promising model. I think the answer is yes. What is interesting about the Montgomery County model is it basically can overlap with existing. It is basically a way of taking whatever affordability mix you have based on the program you're working with and potentially increasing the affordability levels in the building, whether that is the number of apartments or the extent, the depth of the affordability. So I think, yes. The other thing I'd just say on the community land trust model, I think that whether it's the city or the state, there's both obviously the funding piece, giving these groups the resources to do what they're trying to do. I also think there's about making sure they have the support and the training and the operational resources to be successful. And I think that's a really important piece of it as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jay? Jay, you're on.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying. Okay, you can hear me?
Yes, Jay, how are you?
I'm doing all right. My reading of the original Michelama law and its implementation was the original funding was state-sponsored bonds that provided for the construction. But Rockefeller's amendments changed two things. It changed the direction of the funding, and it allowed for buyout. And so we lost the strength of preservation from those two things. So I am interested in your Montgomery model, but I think the history of it is that the bond question is the major question to be able to answer. Can we get bonds sufficient to preserve and to develop new? And I don't know the preservation question about how do you get enough funding for the building to maintain. But I think both of those questions are linked, and the funding model we need, we should work toward, will provide government protection of the funding. So I'd like your comments on that.
Thank you, Jay. Look, you know that I agree with you that we need to do everything we can to preserve the existing Michelama stock we have and not privatize it, and that is going to require governmental support. My instinct is that on the preservation side, that a lot of that needs to and should be done with operating funds, not necessarily with bonded capital. right? Because in a lot of these cases, it's about enabling buildings to continue operating, do the repairs they need to do, but fundamentally supplement operating costs so that tenants can afford to continue to live there under the original sort of construct. I think the question of bonding on the capital side, most of the housing capital plan is a $4.5 billion, bonded capital plan, turns into, many multiples of that. I don't know how much room there is to do more. That is one of the questions, and how that relates to the state's bond cap and the state's bond rating. Those are, again, I'm not a public finance expert. Those are questions on my mind. It's why I have some questions and hesitation about some of the existing proposals that are around, that are basically just spending $500,000 a unit on new units of housing, because I don't think that the state's bond cap can manage that. So, we need to spend every dollar we can on this crisis. There's no question, whether that's operating funds, capital funds, et cetera. But I think we have to beat the bushes for creative ideas that are financially sustainable. But just going back to your original question, on the Mitchell-Lama side specifically, my sense from our conversations, from other conversations that I've had, is that the orders of magnitude of expense necessary to provide for the preservation of these buildings is not beyond what is affordable for the state of New York, and does not, and I think we should make that commitment.
But it may be beyond the ability to maintain affordable monthly costs. If the capital improvements have to come out of the operating, then the monthly costs have to skyrocket when it becomes unaffordable by the people it serves.
Yeah, so some of those, there are, I think just in the last budget, there was, I think, $80 million additional capital put in for those upgrades by Senator Kavanaugh. So I think we should be looking at additional capital funds as well. So I think you and I are in agreement. I think it's just a question of what are the various levers we can pull to get what we need.
So
Right.
just so everybody's clear, Senator Kavanaugh is the head of the Housing Committee from the State Senate, and Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal is the head of the Housing Committee in the Assembly. Arlene, you're next.
Yeah, hi. So I have a question about education, Micah. So could you talk about why you advocated for charter schools when you were involved in that, and why you chose to advocate for charter schools?
Sure. Well, Arlene, I appreciate the question. And what I should tell you is that I'm the only public school parent in this race, and I'm proudly endorsed by the teachers union, who I think care deeply about the future of public education, as I do. I'm the only candidate that has skin in the game. Every day I take my kids, so I don't take my kids to school every day. I took my daughter to school this morning. But I care deeply about the future of public education. More than a decade ago, I worked in city government for an administration that was pro-charter school. And I participated in that work. And there are pieces of that I regret. But in general, I'm proud of every day that I worked in government. I do regret a 11-month stint that I spent outside of government working on those issues, which I resigned from, I should say. But if you look at my record, I would say not only is my personal commitment to public education more strong and serious than anybody else running in this race, but I think if you look at my record, being part of the team that finally fully funded foundation aid 20 years after the state promised to do so, in the state attorney general's office, going after school districts that were creating obstacles to undocumented immigrants enrolling in schools, taking on school districts that were being effectively privatized. Take, East Ramapo, where the school board was basically shipping money off to private schools to privatize that district. And as recently as just this year, working with the state education department and the state teachers union on a plan to change the way and improve the way we teach literacy in schools across the state, which has been leaving kids behind, and to do that collaboratively in a way that supports our schools, supports our teachers. And I know these issues. I know them firsthand. I know the wonder that is a public school that works. I recognize that I have enormous privilege and advantage. My kids go to great public school. Not every kid in the city has that opportunity. And I'm running to make sure that every kid in this city has that opportunity. And I don't think anybody in this race has the personal experience or the professional experience that I do on this issue. And that's why I'm proud to be supported by the teachers union.
So we're going to have one question from Pat and one question that somebody sent me on the chat, and then Micah is going to be out of time. We're going to, I mean, you get to answer the questions, obviously. Pat.
Sure.
Hi, Micah. This is a question that was submitted by someone who couldn't be here today. They wanted to know, they said that Governor Hochul hosted a campaign event for you last night where the suggested minimum contribution to attend was $1,000. So she wanted to know how you would respond to tenants who see this as an attempt by the governor to subvert the will of the community to pick our next representative.
I think the will of the community will be heard on election day. I should say that I'm proudly participating in the state's campaign finance program, and I should note that I was not only the first candidate in this race, but the first candidate in the state to max out the low dollar in-district contributions to raise $175,000 in state funds. And I think that is a testament. I have the highest percentage of donors that live in New York, the highest percentage of donors that live on the West Side. And I was the first candidate in the state of New York to max out the public campaign finance program. And I think I will not presume to judge what the will of the voters will be on June 25th. But I think the early suggestions would be, and if you look at the breadth of support that I have from elected officials like Congressman Nadler, Assemblymember Rosenthal, all three of the Democratic clubs that are from the West Side of Manhattan, filled with activists who are from this community, who care about this community. That, I think, speaks to where I'm coming from. And if you know me, and if you've worked with me, you know that I am fiercely independent, I am honest, and I will tell people what I think. And anybody who thinks that by making a campaign contribution to me, they are going to get anything other than a respectful and fair hearing, which is what everybody will get if I'm elected. Anybody who thinks they're getting more than that from me is going to be sorely mistaken. And I think if you talk with anybody who has worked with me in any of my government roles, they will tell you that's exactly who I am.
So thank you. And now there's a question that was written is for all the candidates. And it is, in addition to preserving the current stock of rent-stabilized units in the city, what will each candidate do to preserve green spaces around housing complexes that currently exist, and to increase green spaces and the planting of trees on sidewalks for shade and clean air?
That's a good question. You know, politicians have an answer for everything. I'm not quite sure I have a great answer for that. I will tell you, I proudly served for the last 10 years as a volunteer on the board of the Riverside Park Conservancy, and for the last 5 years as chair of that board. And I'm very proud of work we've done to make a community park that serves most of this district, all of the district really, an even greater public open space. And I'm particularly proud of work that we've done to begin to address what has been longstanding inequity in the way that both city and philanthropic funds flowed into that park. It is a park that runs, as you all know, from 59th Street now to the George Washington Bridge. And the areas north of 110th Street certainly have never gotten the attention or the resources that the areas south of 110th Street have. And I'm very proud to, in a variety of ways, to have begun to reverse that trend. So I don't know that I have a specific thing to say about how I would go about as a state assemblyman specifically to preserve the green space around housing and to plant more trees, other than to say I have as in I think a lot of areas, I've done some work in the space around public space. I believe it's what makes this city fundamentally livable. I just yesterday received the endorsement of the League of Conservation Voters based on my record on environmental and climate issues. And I will continue that work in the legislature.
Thank you very, very much. This is terrific, Micah. We appreciate it, everybody.
Thank you. Can I the last thing I will say is that what makes this neighborhood the amazing place that it is the spirit of activism. And the people on this Zoom embody that. And I hope you'll support me, but whether or not you do, I so appreciate everything you do. And if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, I really look forward to working with each and every one of you on behalf of our neighborhood.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and our next candidate who is with us is Eli Northrup. So Eli, let's see where. Eli, say something so that you come up on my screen so I can see you. I know you're there. You are. Okay.
Yes.
So Eli is the policy director for the criminal defense practice of the Bronx Defenders, which is a terrific organization that when clients come and say, I've got a criminal problem, they also take care of their housing problems and their immigration problems and their family court. They do the whole thing. So it's a very holistic thing. And Eli has been lobbying in Albany for, was it 6 years, you said? 5 years, 6 years?
Yeah.
On policy matters. And so you know players up there. And you've worked with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Neighborhood Defender Service of Harlem, Legal Aid Society. You've clerked, and you've got an Arthur Garfield Hayes Civil Liberties Fellowship at NYU, about which I'm exceedingly jealous, because when I was a law student at NYU, I was far from qualifying. So it shows you're a smart guy. Okay, so the floor is open for you now to talk for 10, 15 minutes, answer questions, and we gave you some topics. Go to it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all so much for having me and for making the time. It is such an engaged neighborhood. This district, you know, as one of the highest voter turnouts of any in the entire country for Democratic voters, and people are interested in these issues, and I've been having so many conversations. So I'm happy to answer all of your questions. I'll start by talking a little bit about myself and my background and what brought me to this race. I'll start by the fact that saying I am a tenant. I live in a rent stabilized apartment on 111th Street. I've been in this neighborhood for about 10 years. And so I feel these issues deeply, especially when it comes to rent control and stabilization. It's something that I have to think about every year when the guidelines board is thinking about what they're going to do. I've also represented people in housing court and stood next to them and seen what that entails and what it means to face eviction. And so I've seen this from the inside, and I've seen how housing policies affect people directly. I have not run for elected office before, but I've spent my career representing people. As Sue mentioned, I'm a public defender. So I stand next to people often going through some of the most difficult moments of their lives. And so I have seen how government impacts people and how outcomes of cases in criminal court or housing court or immigration court can largely be dictated by the amount of money somebody has or the color of their skin. And that doesn't sit right with me. And so I started going up to Albany 6 legislative sessions ago to advocate for systemic change in these areas. And I've had a good amount of luck. I've worked with grassroots organizations from across the state on a number of transformative campaigns for our legal system to increase transparency and due process, to ensure that individuals with criminal records can find jobs in stable housing, to make sure that we have access to police disciplinary records. I worked on the campaign to legalize cannabis because I had seen how many Black and brown people had suffered from the racially disparate enforcement of that. I've worked on a number of campaigns. I've written bills. I've helped to see them passed, and I've worked to see them implemented. But largely what I've seen up in Albany frustrated and disappointed me, because what I've seen is a number of leaders who are not actively accountable to community, leaders that are accountable to other elected officials or to special interests. And that frankly surprised and disappointed me. And so, you know, I've also, though, seen change happen. I've seen progressive change happen when people come together, across difference in broad coalition. And that is what motivates me. I'm a person who brings others together. And that's what I've consistently done throughout my career and throughout my life. I'll just give you a background about myself as a person. You know, I was not born in New York, although it's been my home for the last 15 years. But I did grow up in a very tight-knit community. And I grew up in the community. I'm Jewish myself, but at the center of my community growing up was this church. And the church was where like everybody in my neighborhood came together. It was where we held town events. You know, my mom would read poetry at the services. Me and my sister would attend the nursery school. My parents were members of the Civic League that met in the basement. And what brought us all together in my community across all these other differences was the sense that we all cared about our neighborhood. I saw differences and difficulties get hashed out, but I saw people work together, and that deep sense of community was instilled in me. When I moved to New York and when I moved to Morningside Heights and this area, I noticed that same sense of community and activism. This is a neighborhood where people want to solve problems and where people work together with their neighbors and others in the neighborhood and attack the problems themselves. And it reminded me of where I grew up. The people reminded me of my parents, of my family, and that's why I've chosen to call it home. And that spirit of activism, I've even become to understand more through running for this office. Now, I know there's a number of issues that you all are interested in, and Sue sent around a list of topics that we hope to discuss, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'll just say that, you know, the housing deal that we get from Albany is unacceptable. Time and time again, year and year again, the real estate industry has way too large of an influence over the policies that we receive. And that was evident in this year's budget. And the so-called good cause eviction, which is an extremely watered down version of the bill that I would have supported, you know, it was accepted and it was passed, but it is totally insufficient. The attempt of the real estate lobby to weaken the rent stabilization laws that I know many of you fought so hard to pass in 2019 and to dismantle them, I have a problem with that. And it would not have been acceptable for me. This is not a budget that I would have supported in any way. My background is in fighting for people and marginalized individuals. And in order for us to meaningfully push back against the powers that be in Albany, including this governor who received over $1.5 million in donations from the real estate lobby, is to have individuals who actually have a history and a record of living their values. That is what I have done throughout my entire career. If you look for it, I haven't worked for anybody whose values I disagree with, because I would not use my power and my energy to execute policies that I didn't agree with. I have stood next to those who don't have political power, and I have pushed it forward. And I will continue to do that. You know, just in terms of a couple of the other issues that I care about and would advocate for, public school funding, you know, schools that are accountable to us, but also well-funded and not pursuing charter schools or outside means to fund those. I would definitely be advocating for universal 3K and pre-K programs. You know, many people cannot afford both rent and childcare. I have friends that have had to leave the city and leave our neighborhood when they have children because they can't afford to live here anymore. That should not be. Government can step in. And when we look at our budget and we think about what's possible and what's not possible at the state level, we had a budget of $237 billion, I believe that was just passed. And, you know, when you look at how much of that has gone to certain carceral solutions, which I don't believe are serving us well, you could take that money and invest it in housing and stability and schooling, which would actually serve to also accomplish community safety. And that is another issue that I care deeply about. I think I'm an expert in this. I have represented people and I've seen when people come through the system, what happens to them. I've seen people cycle through Rikers Island, and I've seen what it does to us and what it does to them. What accomplishes community safety is providing stability, providing supportive housing, providing mental health care. And those are things that I would advocate for. I would also, you know, focus on more local issues. The sidewalk shed, the scaffolding, absolutely unacceptable, and a law that needs to be reformed. And we suffer in this neighborhood disproportionately. I think there was a report in the New York Post recently that said West End Avenue had more scaffolding sheds than it did blocks. That's not right. And, you know, scaffolding is an $8 billion industry in New York City. So think about the influence they have in Albany. We need people that will push back. Noise pollution. high frequency sirens. You know, I live right on Cathedral Parkway, and ambulances are constantly going across and up and down Central Park West. In other places, they have low frequency sirens. And I think we don't think about how that affects us. You know, the constant noise, access to public restrooms, sanitation, rats. We need to take care of our neighborhood and take care of each other. And then, of course, you know, our community spaces, our green spaces, our parks, the places where we can meet neighbors and interact with each other. That's what makes New York great. The ability to really meaningfully interact with different people. And that's what holds us. That's the glue that holds us together. So that's a bit about me. You know, I'm running a grassroots campaign. As I mentioned, I have not run for elected office before, but I have spent my career fighting, and that is why I'm endorsed by progressive groups who I have fought alongside. It's why I'm endorsed by Tenants PAC, the Working Families Party, New York Communities for Change, the Jewish Vote, the United Auto Workers. It's why I'm endorsed by progressive legislators like Senator Gustavo Rivera, Amanda Septimo, Anna Kellis, Latrice Walker. I have consistently fought for those who are marginalized and oppressed, and I will be that fighter in Albany consistently. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. So thank you.
Thank you. So Carmen, you had a question that you would post, which was what's your stance on the Trust PAC and RAD?
Oh, I think that.
What is your stance on the NYCHA has various plans right now where to get the funding for repairs that need to be made. And so there's something called a Trust PAC, there's something called RAD. Do you have a stance on those?
Yeah, you know, I need to research a bit more about the Trust PAC and RAD specifically. And I know Carmen is an expert in this area, given her involvement as the president of the Tenant Association. I think it is absolutely deplorable, the conditions and the corruption within NYCHA and how we have not seen meaningful investment in our public housing. I think public housing and social housing are so important because the market is not going to provide the housing that we need. And if we keep thinking about housing as something that is going to be just a tweak to the market to incentivize building, it's not going to get us where we need to be. I think government has a role of coming in and investing in housing, because investing in housing goes way beyond just providing people with a place to live. It is safety, it is stability, and it will address many other issues that we have in our community. So Carmen, I'd actually, you know, I'd love to talk to you more about your opinion about that and learn from you about what the best way to accomplish that is.
Thank you. Jay? Jay, are you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Can you say how you understand or what can be done to expand the social housing, to protect the social housing we have? In particular, how do we protect the Mishulama program and understand what Mishulama is, so the name doesn't get used, the reality gets used, that we have more real Mishulama and we preserve rigorously the ones we have?
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of priority, Jay. It's a matter of prioritizing this at the state level and pushing back. I'm a supporter of the ideas of social housing and the bill that was put forward by Assemblymember Gallagher to create housing at the state level that protects us. And the same thing would be true of Michalama housing and that initiative. And all of these housing, social housing and investment in housing and affordable housing, rent stabilization, rent control, there is money for this in the budget. There is capital. The reason that we as tenants don't get protected is because of the real estate's outsized influence in Albany. It's because of the money they give to candidates. It's because of the people that are in their pocket, and they've convinced many elected officials that their voice needs to be heard louder than tenants. They're not the experts. We are the experts in what is right for our communities. And in order to actually meaningfully push back in Albany, we need fighters who live that and not people who will compromise or bend to the real estate lobby. And so I think that is what's important when deciding who to support in this election.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
Okay, do other people have questions? So, seeing no hands, I have a couple. It costs a lot of money to build and to preserve housing, right? What do you think of the 485X program which is replacing 421A as a tax break for landlords? Are you familiar with it?
Yes, I'm familiar with it. I do not think that it goes far enough. And I think there are other means of raising capital to support housing. The Invest in Our New York campaign, which would raise taxes on the rich in New York, is one of those ways to do that. So it's, we don't have a zero-sum game. There are ways to create money to invest. 421A, I think, was a failure. It did not provide enough affordable housing. The affordable housing that it provided wasn't totally affordable. And it ended up being really more of a blank check for developers. And I don't see this new version of it as going far enough in terms of creating housing that is meaningfully affordable. Again, I think developers have their voice heard time and time again up in Albany in a disproportionate way, and that's reflected in legislation like this.
Okay, do other people have hands up? Otherwise, I got more questions. Okay, how do you think we can get more enforcement by DHCR or HCR, especially now that the individual apartment improvement rent increases has gone, that law has gone into effect, which means that there's a target on the backs of longer term tenants, because landlords can get more rent increases if they do improvements on an apartment that had been occupied by a longer term tenant.
Right, and the increase of amount they can earn is obviously, as you mentioned, Sue, and this is another unfortunate thing about the compromises made in the budget. It's going to put a target on many backs of people who have been long-term renters. I've seen this time and time again in legislation. You can pass legislation you can have consequences, but if you don't have enforcement or teeth, it's meaningless. We've seen this play out like with the cannabis legalization. Without any enforcement of the unlicensed shops, there's a proliferation of them. So I have worked in different areas to ensure implementation, not just passing of a good bill. And this is an example, Sue, of where we may have in name a law that, protects tenants, but if you don't have enforcement, it doesn't mean anything. So, it's creating a meaningful way to report, and it's having lawyers and others who are responsive to those reports, and it's funding and prioritizing that sort of enforcement. And I think that's something that, as a assembly member, constituent services is something you can provide in that vein. A place that, tenants can go if they are experiencing this sort of behavior from a landlord. They can be sure that they can rely on their elected official to step in and advocate and ensure their rights are protected. I have experience in picking up the phone and helping people. And that is what I will do as an assembly member. It's what I'm equipped to do and will continue to do in this area as well.
So when Albany came to its budget agreement, there were not a lot of people in the room, right? You have Carl Hastie, who was the Speaker of the Assembly. You have Andrea Stewart-Cousins from the Majority Leader in the Senate. You have Governor Hochul, and I'm assuming you got Real Estate Board of New York, but it's not clear. So how do we expand that?
Right. It's the age-old question, and I've been going up to Albany and been so frustrated by the way that this functions, that assembly members are essentially fed a budget and say, vote yes or no. But I do have ideas about how to build power, because I've seen what works when people come together. And I think there's a couple things that you need to do. But the first is you need to work with your colleagues and build power within the body. And you need to have credibility within the body. So assembly members that have expertise on certain issues are listened to. And those who go out and understand what people are experiencing in Long Island or Hudson Valley, oftentimes the speaker is making decisions based on, so quote unquote, marginal members. If you want to be effective as a legislator, you need to take those views into account, but you have to do the work. You have to do the work of understanding what other people are facing in their districts. And you have to build relationships with people that don't necessarily agree with you. I have experience in doing that. And the campaigns that I've worked on have been successful when we've been able to convince people who are allies who you may not think of as normal allies. And the way you do that is, as again, building relationships, going to their districts if you need to, and doing the work and hustling and fighting. You cannot give in to the institutional power, which is what so often happens. You know, if the speaker understands that somebody has a block and somebody has knowledge and has built a coalition that will not align with him, he has to listen. And that's what we need to build. We can't just say it's always going to be 3 people in the room. And we can't just align ourselves with the power that exists right now. We need to actually build outside forces if we want to change the way that New York State functions. And I am the person in the race who can meaningfully do that. I'm not a person who's beholden to any interest or political relationship. I am beholden to my moral values and to what I've seen on the ground. I'm a lawyer. I have fought in criminal court for people who are never given a chance. And I don't hear no and take it and accept it. I fight and I use the skills that I have, and I've consistently used them for that good and not for, you know, any sort of policy that I don't agree with. And you can look at my record and you won't find me supporting or being aligned with or working for somebody who supports policies that I don't. So you can trust me.
So we'll do, I guess, one last question, and then we'll, after you answer that, we'll shift to our next candidate. But what about public versus charter schools?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of charter schools. I went to public schools for my entire life. Many of my friends in New York send their kids to public schools, and I have people on my campaign that have worked in public schools as teachers. When we divert resources to charter schools, don't hold them accountable and give them money, we take it away from our neediest children, and that's unacceptable. So I'm a supporter of public schools and would be a consistent supporter.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any final questions for Micah? I'm sorry, for Eli. Jeez, Micah was the last page, the last person. We've shifted gears. For Eli Northrup, do we have any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Eli.
Thank you, Sue. And I will just say I really appreciate it taking the time. I've met a number of you knocking doors. You know, when I'm out in the neighborhood, and I'm out all the time, so you may have seen me on a street corner or at your doorstep, and I talk to people about what they need and what they want. The message and my background is truly resonating with people. I think it's so important, especially to galvanize younger voters as well, that we have people that are not just career-long political actors. We need people like us to step up and bring that fight to Albany. And if we don't do that, and we keep just electing the officials that other elected officials tell us to elect, we will never have meaningful change. It will not happen. So I hope for your support. I hope to see you, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you, Eli. All right. Our next candidate is Melissa Rosenberg. And Melissa, if you say hello, you'll pop up on my screen so I can see your face. Good. Hi. Okay. So Melissa has worked with Community Board 7 for the last 7 years. She's been a policy analyst with Supportive Housing Network of New York. You've worked with the Office of Management and Budget of New York City. You have a master's of public administration from NYU and a degree in economics from McGill. And if you'd like to say some more about yourself, go ahead. And you have, 10 or 15 minutes, and then you can answer questions.
Great. Well, thank you all for having me. And thank you, Sue, and other tenant leaders for bringing together this group. I think it's really essential we have these forums to hear from candidates and really hold us accountable. Again, my name is Melissa Rosenberg. I'll just add on a little bit to that bio from Sue. My career has really been focused on public service in one form or another for the last 10 plus years. As you mentioned, I've been on Community Board 7 for 7 years. And during that time, I had the privilege of chairing the Housing Committee, where we got to talk about a lot of the issues I think we'll focus on today, as well as on the NYCHA developments in the district and trying to mitigate some of the really difficult conditions and circumstances that tenants brought to our attention. But I've also been working in policy in a lot of different areas throughout my career. I worked on affordable housing and addressing street homelessness as a policy analyst. I've also worked on gun violence prevention and the intersection with intimate partner violence. I worked on diversifying the medical workforce so that folks can see medical providers that reflect their own identities and feel that comfort of care. I spent the last 4 years working as a consultant at a government relations firm, where I was really the in-house affordable housing expert and homelessness services expert, and got to continue my work with nonprofits creating housing during this obviously historic and really difficult housing crisis in New York City. So I'm most focused on affordability, as I really do see myself as a housing advocate. It's something I've advocated on in my spare time, and of course on the community board. So ensuring we have affordability in our neighborhood and that tenants can afford to stay in their homes, are not harassed out, but also that there's opportunity for new folks to really join our great community is really important to me. But I see affordability more broadly also in terms of ensuring that we have affordable childcare options. That's the second biggest expense our families face after housing. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of families leave our district and our city, because they can't bear the cost and there's no public support to really help take that pressure off of them. I'm also very focused on street safety. I think, pedestrians and cyclists deserve to feel safe while walking down the street or riding down the street, but also in terms of addressing street homelessness and getting our most vulnerable neighbors who are unhoused the services they need, especially mental health services, so that they can feel more safe and that we can also feel more safe in our neighborhood. I'm also very focused to continue to speak on that, on mental health resources more broadly, ensuring we have resources for children in our school, many of whom are struggling post the COVID-19 pandemic and the effect that had on many families, but also resources for those who suffer from serious mental illness. So creating more inpatient beds for psychiatric hospitals is very important. I'm a young Jewish woman and, as I said, a housing advocate. So I felt really compelled to get into this race because I think we need voices like mine that are focused on those areas and are really ready to stand up to power and be a vocal advocate, but also be a consensus builder. And I think that's something I was really skilled at during my time on the community board. We faced some really difficult situations and fights, one being, a bit south of the district, the Lucerne Hotel, and the other COVID dedensification sites. That was a big battle that I think I was a strong advocate for equity and housing justice during, and during really inflamed discussions on that topic or others, have been able to bring folks to a place of understanding and, again, consensus. So given my passion, I think my really wide breadth of skills in areas I've dabbled in and really gained a lot of knowledge in, I've been on the ground in this community doing the work for almost a decade. I'd like to take all of that to Albany to become an advocate for you all. So I'll leave it there because I really want this to be about what you want to hear about and answer your questions. And yeah, I look forward to them.
So I'll start off and then people can ask other questions. The recent budget in Albany, and particularly as it concerned housing, what did you like? What didn't you like? What would you change? What would you like to accomplish?
Sure. I mean, I guess I felt some disappointment with the final housing deal. I don't think it went far enough to address this crisis. I think the reason that, it was able to get done was that it left out some of the pieces of policy that were most important, but most controversial, especially outside of New York City. And that is encouraging transit-oriented development around, train stations in the suburbs or even the far, like Eastern Queens, and for example, in New York City. And also having mandated growth targets, I think is really important so that rich localities outside of New York City can't get away with just creating no housing, and pushing that whole burden onto the city of New York. In terms of the other pieces of the housing deal, of course, I'm a market rate renter myself, so I am, will now be covered under good cause. So it's something I'm supportive of. The final version that was included, I think it's unfortunately not going to be very workable. A system that depends on tenants having to take legal action themselves is really a difficult paradigm. And even as someone as privileged as myself, like if I faced a 25% rent increase last year, like if I were to try to fight that in housing first, I think I would struggle. So trying to think about more vulnerable folks in our community, trying to operate under that legislation, I don't think it's really well designed. I was also really disappointed to see that housing access vouchers were not included in the final budget deal. I think there was really widespread support for the initiative, and it was just sort of fiscal conservatism on the part of the governor's team that kept again, a popular, good public policy-based program from being implemented. So I was disappointed in that. I was pleased to see that office conversions were included and that we lifted the cap on density, which I think is really intertwined with enabling those office conversions to occur. Obviously, those will have more of an impact south of our district, but still, looking at our housing market citywide, even statewide, I think can definitely help take some pressure off. And happy to speak more to other specific policies as well.
What about the individual apartment improvement rent increases are now higher for rent stabilized tenants and higher still on longer term tenants in apartments?
Yeah, I think the tiered system that they designed is really kind of going to put a target on the backs of a lot of seniors in our community who are most vulnerable, and have been in those units for a long time. And we're really creating an incentive to target them specifically, since that's where the largest increases are allowed. So I don't agree with the design of the system. I don't think it was honestly a necessary policy tweak to make to the 2019 rent stabilization legislation.
Mm-hmm. And what about social housing?
Yeah, I'm a supporter. I think I like the idea of starting with a social housing program on state-owned land and trying to create sort of a pilot program that then we can scale up more broadly and try to find ways to make it work city and statewide. We've seen social housing work in other countries. I think I'm also sort of an all the tools in the toolbox person, and I don't think that's one that should be left out of the box, if you will. So I would definitely like to see it implemented. I think it's going to be a challenge, but once we work out those kinks, I would definitely like to see it rolled out and scaled up.
And how would you preserve existing social housing like the Mitchell-Lamas that we have in New York?
So I think it's ensuring that they're financially stable. And I think that means bringing in government assistance when needed to provide, whether it's capital funding for major capital upgrades that are needed in these buildings that maybe the long-term residents aren't able to fund themselves, or if it's filling the gap between what certain tenants are able to pay if it's a rental, to ensure that there's enough operating income to support the building. But I think preservation is a huge priority for us, especially in this district, given that we have a history of so much affordable housing and the legacy of it, and we can't afford to lose that really valuable resource.
So people jump in if you have other questions, raise your hands or just jump in. I have another, just something I wasn't quite clear when you were speaking, introducing yourself. You said you spent the last 4 years at a public relations firm?
Yeah, government relations. I'll just say more honestly lobbying, but my lobbying work was all really focused on affordable housing and working with homeless service providers.
Which perspective? And who, like what types of clients? I'm not saying you have to identify clients.
Yeah, sure. So for example, I worked with one nonprofit that the city was transferring to them and like really old subpar homeless shelter for them to redevelop it into supportive housing and a new health clinic. So I worked with them to kind of navigate the community relations process, the NIMBYism, honestly, in the neighborhood. This was in Midtown East. So give them advice on like what supporters to bring into the tents, how to kind of put together a proposal that could have a lot of community support. Unfortunately, I had to work on a lot of homeless shelter sightings that saw a lot of pushback in NIMBYism. So working with the nonprofits to really have a good open line of communication with the community, talk to them about how to talk about their best practices in those shelters, how we could create, community advisory boards that work with the communities in which they were working. So advising nonprofits on kind of policy matters and concrete projects.
So did you happen to work on the West Side Federation of Senior and Supportive Housing Development on 108th?
So that's when I was back at the Supportive Housing Network of New York. I wasn't yet in my next position as a consultant, but I did work with WSFISH. Paul Freitag is great, and obviously Shelley is great. And we talked with them and kind of supported them at the hearings and gave them information on who else could be supportive in the hearings. And I was also on Community Board 7 at that time and was a vocal supporter and tried to push my colleagues to support as well. And then we did get an approval from CB7 in favor of that project, which I think definitely made it easier for the council member, Mark Levine, at the time to be supportive despite a lot of community pushback around the loss of parking.
Thanks. Okay, Pat.
Hi, Melissa. You rightfully touched on the fact that the recent budget is going to really place a target on the back of seniors, especially seniors who've been in their apartments for a long time. So in terms of enforcement and providing some support for them, what specific actions have you taken for housing justice and tenants' rights? Because this will really become an issue for our senior tenants who will need assistance in addressing this issue.
Sure. I mean, I think HCR, the Division of Homes and Community Renewal, is, the enforcement agency is really under-resourced for what they are asked to do, which is protect millions of tenants, many of whom are vulnerable and do not even know they exist, to reach out for assistance. So I think ensuring that they get an increase in staffing for the folks doing the enforcement work and working in the Office of Rent Administration is really key, but also I think kind of expanding their mission to do more outreach, especially to those who, they have data on who they would know to be more vulnerable, is really key. And, in my work on Community Board 7, on the Housing Committee, I was really an advocate for strengthening our rent laws in 2019. We worked with Housing Justice for All to pass a resolution in favor of those changes. So I think, again, it's about ensuring that now that there are guardrails, since this policy has already been put into place in this budget, to prevent, our most vulnerable from getting pushed out.
So just to follow up, what one specific action do you think would be needed to make HCR a bit more effective? What one specific action do you think you would want to see?
Yeah, I think having a person who is specifically like overseeing an outreach team, I would add on staff for that, who are like going out to the community, like going to events in our neighborhood, or like looking at, again, the lists of people who are in these units that qualify, adding a team to do that and make sure people are aware of their rights, and inspecting complaints of bad actors. That would be an action I would take, of like kind of creating a team that's really robust to do outreach specifically and not just be responsive to incoming complaints.
And this is my last question. There has been some legislation that has been introduced to remove the tax break that Columbia University and NYU receives. And while we recognize that this would necessitate a constitutional amendment, is that something you would support? And how would you either advance this legislation, or if you would be in support of it, or would you be in support of it?
Yeah, I would definitely be in support. These organizations are not like the nonprofit service providers I was speaking about earlier. They are incredibly wealthy and well-resourced, and really there's no strong public policy justification for them to get these tax breaks. So I would definitely be in favor. Like you identified, there are definitely some significant hurdles. So I think definitely working with my colleagues to make sure there's an understanding of the necessity of first dealing with this in the legislative forum, and showing them the impact that it has on the community, this tax exempt status. I think you can look at a map of Morningside Heights and see, if you try to look for what Columbia doesn't own, it's just these tiny little pockets throughout the neighborhood. So you can really see the impact that this kind of cost-cutting policy has had for Columbia. It's allowed them to become like a wild acquisitioner of property up there and really push out folks, especially even above the district when it comes to the Manhattanville expansion. So I think in doing a lot of education and outreach to try to get that constitutional amendment passed, and voicing to people who are out of the district who might have concerns about it, like it would not affect other institutions who definitely need the tax break, let's say upstate institutions that do not have huge endowments, that they would be protected.
Jay. Not yet.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi.
That's good. Hi, Melissa. Do you have any ideas how the legislature can somehow do better oversight of HCR, or would you be in favor of an ombuds office where complaints about HCR and HPD could be brought, so that we feel we don't hit a dead end when HCR is not responding to what we need? Is it possible there could be another place to go to make those complaints or to get some action?
Yeah, I really like that proposal. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think we have as much oversight as we can through the legislature, through the hearings that they can hold, but it is limited, and it often, takes outreach from legislators to get basic complaints responded to. So I think an ombudsman makes a lot of sense. But I will just say also, I think, I know people who work at HCR, like they are dedicated, well-meaning people. And I think given the resources they really need, could be a lot more responsive. So I think it's giving a carrot and a stick to ensure that they can really be out there doing the enforcement work that is so necessary to ensure that, we don't see more tenants harassed out of their units.
So one of the issues that has come up is, for example, tenants can get lists of buildings that have rent stabilized units in them, but we don't know which apartments are rent stabilized. We don't need to know the rents, but we need to know which are rent stabilized. And we also need to know whether landlords have actually registered them as occupied or vacant. And we don't have that information. And if you present a Freedom of Information Law request, you foil them, aside from the fact that it can take you 6 months to a year, and you don't get a whole lot of information. And so the question is, why can't more information that the state has become public, so that we can know whether landlords are registering rent stabilized apartments or as occupied or vacant, right? A lot of apartments are not. I know Pat has talked about that at Park West Village. Other people were talking about it at a meeting that she and I were at today. We don't have that information, and getting it is extremely difficult. There's just a real lack of transparency. It seems to me that a decent computer program could take care of a lot of that.
Yeah, I think two thoughts come to mind. One is that self-reporting in and of itself is a huge issue for rent stabilization as a system. It just leads to bad behavior and incorrect data. So I think if there's a way to, take it out of the landlord's hands, which would be a really big initiative, it's something that HCR should try to look at as a long-term goal. But also on the just kind of opacity issue of their data, it's something I had even faced in my professional context. We were working with something that landlords would do is work with a nonprofit and take a formerly homeless person into their housing for, let's say, a short contract of a few years. And there's a loophole that allows, if they're working with a nonprofit institution, that the apartment gets temporarily deregulated and out of rent stabilization. So they would use a nonprofit to provide that housing, and then after a few years, kick out that homeless tenant, not renew their lease, and then never re-register the unit. So we would essentially they would be using nonprofits to lose rent stabilized units. And I was working on that policy issue when I was at the Supportive Housing Network. And in that role, I couldn't even get HCR to provide us with clear data to try to help make recommendations on it. So I do find it incredibly frustrating. And I do not see a strong policy justification for why that data cannot be public, given that essentially these are a scarce resource that needs to be protected for the public good. And that is why rent stabilization law exists, is to protect us during a housing emergency and crisis. So I would definitely be an advocate for more transparency when it comes to DHCR data.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions right now? So let me just ask you, what's your position on charter versus public schools?
Yeah, I'm opposed to really any expansion of charter schools. I think right now they do funnel precious resources away from our public schools without being held to the same standards in terms of the level of vulnerability of tenants that they are serving. Also, if we want to look at how charter schools serve us, look in states like Ohio, where the public education system has completely disappeared because of the proliferation of charters. That's the future we're looking at without more regulation of charter schools, where you wouldn't even be able to get a public education. So we need to do whatever we can to prevent any increase in charters. I think they need more accountability. There's a lot of instances of really not okay disciplinary practices occurring with their majority serving children of color at these schools, and there's not the same amount of oversight that we have at DOE schools. So I think they need to be monitored more closely and held to the same standards, at least, as our public schools.
And a question that had been posed, and I think Micah answered it, or Eli answered it, and I forgot to ask Micah, but I'll ask you. And that was, in addition to preserving rent stabilized units in the city, what would you do to preserve green spaces around housing complexes that currently exist, and in general, planting more trees and providing more shade and clean air?
Sure, I think we can't underestimate how important our green spaces are for health of us, especially in really dense districts like the 69th. I think we saw during COVID-19 what a precious resource they are. I think we need to make sure that there's adequate funding on the city level, of course, and that the state is supplementing that as well. We need to ensure we're funding, our community gardens, which I know so many of us enjoy and rely on as places of respite in a very loud, busy city. I think so, ensuring that wherever there are friends of groups or conservancies that aren't as well resources, so let's say Riverside Park or Central Park, that they're being given public support to ensure upkeep of these really precious public spaces. And then, I think there's something we can all do personally, which is all get more involved and help do cleanups and really just engage more with those spaces personally to, and also tell our friends and families to do so as well.
Okay. Let's see. What about the New York heat law? It didn't get put into the budget, but
yeah.
I
was. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll jump
a little bit about it if you know about it. And
No, I was really disappointed to see that it was not included in the budget deal. I think, as someone who's really focused on equity and who's worked in housing, we've done a lot to try to at least address how much of a person's income should go towards housing costs. And another thing besides having a shelter over your head is having heating and cooling to make sure that your family can be safe, whatever the season. So I think it's really good, equitable policy to ensure that we control what percentage of a person's income is going towards utilities. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I really hope to see it passed before the end of session. So I'm definitely a strong supporter.
Okay, Pat.
Yeah, thanks, Sue, for bringing up the issue of heat, because when we look back on that very tragic experience in the Bronx 2 years ago, where they had a fire that, killed a large number of the residents, the focus appeared to be on the fact that some of the doors did not close.
Yeah.
But what precipitated the need for the tenants to have heating units in the first place was the fact that they were not being provided with sufficient heat. and there had been many complaints to HPD that had gone unanswered. And
Mhm.
so in addition to HCR being underfunded, HPD is also underfunded. So what solution would you propose to either fund HCD or make it more efficient and responsive to tenant complaints?
Yeah, I think the Twin Parks fire was a real disaster, and I think you're right about the root cause being, landlord neglect of issues. And also, I have that issue in my apartment where I've complained numerous times about my heat and not had my management company be responsive. And I use space heaters, and I always think about that fire and sort of like the risk calculation you're having to make, but you need to stay warm during the winter. Like I know a lot of folks who also work for HPD, and they're incredibly dedicated, but they are being asked to do so much with so little. So I think they have, all this unfilled headcount at the agency that really does need to be filled. With the mayor, I know we're talking state here, but the mayor cutting HPD's budget in his rounds of pegs makes no sense. Their budget, the vast majority of it does come from the federal government and state government. So shaving away what little city resources they have makes no sense in terms of public policy. So I think ensuring that they are able to hire up those vacant positions that are not held artificially empty to show savings on the part of the city. I think that's a practice that needs to be addressed. They need to be able to hire faster. And I think we need to fund a really robust both capital and enforcement budgets to ensure we're creating new affordable housing, but also maintaining and inspecting the housing we already have that is affordable, and paying the inspectors enough so that we're able to retain them and not see so much turnover at the agency that might lead to complaints not being investigated because they're short-staffed or it's a new person who's less experienced. So I think the state does have a role in shoring up HPD's resources as well, given that they have limited city funding.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from Lily?
Say thank you so much for your time and your really thoughtful questions. I again hope to see some of you out on the street as I'm campaigning, and I just want to again express that I've already been doing this work in the community for the last 7 years, and I'd really like to keep serving our community, whether in this capacity as assembly member or to continue on the community board and really stand up and make some change in our neighborhood that I think could really use it. So thank you again for your time, and I'll let you continue.
Thank you. Okay, and our next and last speaker is Carmen Quinones, who has been the head of the Park West, I'm getting my names and my development, of the Frederick Douglass Houses, which is part of NYCHA. She's been head of that tenant association for 9 years, I think. Is that right, Carmen? And she has been extremely active. She strengthened the resident and police connection. She coordinated food donations to 12 NYCHA developments in Manhattan, Queens, and the Bronx. During COVID in the 1990s, she was chief of staff to Assembly members Angelo Del Toro and Nelson Dennis, both in East Harlem. And you want to improve housing and end mayoral support of schools. That's correct. And endorsed by Curtis Sliwa. Was the last thing that I saw, but I'm sure you can update it. So, Carmen, you're muted. The floor is yours.
First, thank you for having me, and it's nice to see you, Susan. I haven't seen you in a long time.
We live across the street from each other.
I know, but I haven't seen you in a while. But thank you again for the invite. Pat, I wanted you to know that I went back and I studied about the 485 and 421, honey. Yes, I did. I live and I breathe the realities of NYCHA housing every day. Not just as a resident, but as a council president who has fought for the better living conditions here. I have seen firsthand the success and failures of our recent housing budget. What encouraged me was the commitment to preserving existing affordable housing, which is critical for our communities. However, the budget falls short in addressing the rampant issue of the warehoused, rent-stabilized apartments, such as those at Park West Village. As your assembly member, I will push for legislation to penalize warehousing and ensure these apartments are available to those who need them. Regarding recent state law changes, I applaud the effort for good cause evictions as it protects our most vulnerable tenants from unfair displacement. However, I deeply am concerned that the increased threshold for individual apartments improvement, which can be exploited to hike rents unjustifiable. As for housing vouchers and social housing programs like the Michalama, I propose we expand these initiatives to ensure more inclusive, supportive framework for our community. Looking forward, I am committed to fighting for a more robust version of social housing that doesn't just mimic past successes, but innovates new solutions that address our current housing crisis. This includes revisiting programs like 485X to ensure that they serve the best interests of our communities without the pitfall of the previous 421. You know, I must say, my son now lives at 700, and Michalama programs have been pivotal in offering middle and low class family affordable housing opportunities in the neighborhood that will otherwise be financially out of reach. So the Michalama housing isn't just about providing a roof over heads. It's about ensuring that New Yorkers from all walks of life have access to safe, affordable, and vibrant communities where they can thrive. The community and stability and diversity. These developments foster stable, diverse communities that enhance social cohesion and inclusively. Let me tell you, I have 5 generations here. As I said before, when I went to meet my council, I have 19 grandchildren and 13 great-grand. I have lived here for 35 years, and I've been fighting ever since. And now that all of this budget and everything that's going on, it's just got me up in ends. Because when is it that we're gonna get our chance to do the right thing? At this moment in our lifetime, our children and our children's children are not gonna have anything if we keep doing what we're doing right now. You know, we have I also was talking about the schools and our children's education is the bedrock of their future. Our community's prosperity as a product of public schools myself, I know the value they provide and the challenges they face. We need to ensure that our schools are not just adequately funded, but are innovative hubs that cater to all the needs of our students. This includes enhancing special programs and interrogating technology and vocational training that align with future job markets. Additionally, while charter schools are part of our educational landscape, our focus must remain on strengthening public schools as the backbone of our education. And yes, I am reading my notes because I did a lot of homework since I left. And I want to make sure I hit it the right way. One thing I'm good at is I'm good at reading. I'm good at, just getting into the core of what our problems are. I have been fighting for now, like I said, 35 years in public housing. But what we all must realize is that we all, and I don't care where you live, we're all in danger of displacement. Our seniors are in danger, and we gotta do something about it. You know, I'm gonna miss Danny O'Donnell. Danny O'Donnell was very good with us over here at Douglas Houses. I am scared to death at our new politicians. I am so scared to death of these people. I don't know what to do. And that's why I'm running. Because I believe we need someone that's not gonna take no for an answer and is gonna fight for our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren, and our grandparents. You know, I lost my grandparents, I lost my mom, I lost my dad, but I inherited, especially here in Douglas Houses, grandmothers, aunts, uncles. I've inherited a lot. I'm really rich. And that's why I find it so important for me to keep fighting for justice. I think, you know, we need to do the solutions. I put some solutions together, some calls to action. And I just want to read a couple. You know, I propose that a significant portion of our reserve funds be immediately directed toward rectifying these disparities in the education and housing. We need actionable, measurable programs that not only address the symptoms, but also the root causes of segregation and economic disenfranchisement. Our education, specifically, I will push for a budget provisions that mandate and fund programs designed to desegregate schools and improve educational outcomes in underprivileged areas. This includes funding for magnet programs, revised districting, and enhanced support services for students in schools in marginalized communities. There's also right now we're having roofing done. We're having so many things done, and I don't know if a lot of people know about Section 3. But Section 3 is it's almost like the housing law. It's the 964 regulations that we live by here in housing. And for NYCHA, I demand a full audit of Section 3 compliance, followed by the establishment of a compliance task force with the power to enforce and oversee the proper execution of these contracts. It is not just about meeting quotas. It's about building a sustainable economic framework for residents. Public transparency and accountability. Finally, I call the greater transparency and community involvement in how these decisions are made. The residents of NYCHA and other affected communities must have a voice in how their lives are shaped by our policies. Targeted investment and combat homelessness. With close to $40 billion in reserve funds, it is both necessary and urgent that we dedicate $1 billion to robustly address the homeless crisis plaguing our state. This funding should not only aim to provide immediate shelter, but must also be invested in sustainability. Long-term solutions such as permanent affordable housing, expanded mental health services, and effective job training programs. The approach must be transparent and accountable, ensuring that every dollar spent is visible to the taxpayer and contributes directly, lifting our fellow New Yorkers out of homelessness. This isn't just about spending money. It's about lifting our fellow New Yorkers out of homelessness. This isn't just about spending money. It's about investing in our community's future and showing true leadership in times of need. I did further, Pat, and I want you to know you sent me home. You sent me home to really do some research. The past budget has achieved this goal, placing the reserves just over 15%. This amounts to approximately $34.95 billion if we take 15% of the total $233 billion budget. Let me tell you, positive. Gun violence prevention, $347 million, a 53 increase. Positive. I strongly support the significant increase in funding for gun violence prevention. This is critical investment in our safety and well-being, especially in our communities that are disproportionately affected by gun violence. While the funding is welcome, we need to ensure it is used for comprehensive community-based interventions that address the root causes of violence, not just increase policing. Retail theft, $40 million to establish dedicated teams. Retail theft not only affects business owners, but also the community's sense of security. I support this initiative, and as it aims to safeguard our local economies. We must be vigilant, though, to ensure that these measures do not lead over policing in our neighborhoods. Balance is essential. Domestic violence, $40 million for law enforcement and support. The funding is critical. As someone who has seen the impacts of domestic violence up close, I believe this investment is supporting survivors and holding abusers accountable and is overdue. We need to ensure that these funds also support preventive, educational, and outreach, not just for prosecution. Hate crimes increased by 10 million to 35 million. Enhancing security at a vulnerable communities location is a proactive step to safeguarding all residents, particularly those from marginalized groups. Our challenge: securing funding needs to be prepared with community outreach and education programs to address the root cause of hate. You know, there's just so much that we need to do, but they need to give it back to us, to the people. We're the ones that know what's going on in our community. We're the only ones that can make this right. And they need to include us in every aspect of that budget, the decision making. We need to be at that table. And until we open the door for our community to be there, to have a part in the say, it's not going to work. We have to bring it back to the people. You talked about a little earlier, you talked about the New York Act. The New York Act is a step in the right direction for protecting consumers and ensuring utilities are affordable. However, more needs to be done to ensure these laws are enforced and that utility companies are held accountable for the rates they charge and the service they provide. I will advocate for more comprehensive audits and stricter regulations around utility rate increases to ensure fairness and transparency. I wanted to talk about if you want me to shut up, let me know.
Well, do people have questions so far, or
yes.
If not, I don't see any hands up, so you can keep talking.
I wanted to talk a little bit about safety regarding the e-bikes and scooters. These modes of transportation have become integral to our city fabric, especially in a post-pandemic world. However, the safety concerns they present cannot be overlooked. I propose the implementation of more rigorous safety regulations and designated lanes for e-bikes and scooters to protect both the riders and the pedestrians. Furthermore, our district needs enhanced community policing effort that builds trust and ensures safety without resorting to invasive tactics. You know, just 2 weeks ago, my grandson was riding a scooter and he had an accident. And his whole arm, the bone was out, the whole nine. Mm. You know, these are things that we think are safe and they're not. And we have to ensure that we have the rules and regulations. In New York City Housing Authority, you know what's wrong with New York City Housing Authority? They need to get rid of the people from the top up. There's people making money that ain't doing nothing. You know, someone has to challenge the status quo. And I guess that's why people don't like me too much, because I challenge people. And I do that because I have a family. If I die tomorrow, what am I leaving my grandkids, my great-grandkids? What am I leaving my children? I want them to make sure that they fight too. I have a granddaughter who's a detective over there in Atlanta. And I have also a sheriff in Atlanta County, too, in Orangeville County. And I don't know if we remember the Floyd thing. Let me tell you something. When Floyd, when everybody broke out on that, let me tell you something. Me and my daughter stood up, wondering if my granddaughter and my grandson were going to come back. They were out there for 3 days without communication. You know, something's got to be done. Everybody is not accountable for things that other people do, but we are accountable for our own actions. You know, and all I ask out of our elected officials is to stop selling us out. Stop selling us out. And it's happening, and it's going to keep happening if we keep allowing it. If we keep allowing it, forget about it. You know, I really appreciate this time. And I want to thank Pat and Ken. Y'all made me come back here, and y'all made me dig in, and I dug in.
Thank you for doing that. Do other people besides me have questions? So what, if anything, would you do in terms of increasing the amount of affordable housing? And I'm sorry, I'll shut up after this because I didn't see that. Increasing the amount of affordable housing.
I think we have a lot of financial drawbacks, even with caps and restrictions, increased rentals. You know that the AI can place a financial strain on tenants, especially if the improvements are cosmetic rather than, essential. Tenants who may not necessarily value the improvement at the same level as the rent increase may find themselves paying more without proportional benefits. I think that we just really need to look at different policies. And to tell you the truth, I've heard of different policies that they have. I just don't know if our elected officials are really pushing the right thing. And, I don't know everything, and I'm not going to pretend that I do. I want to know what's happening up there. I want to see what's going up there to see where the floor is. There's a floor somewhere that we're missing. We are missing it. I just did a 501c3 for Resident Management Corporation. Resident Management Corporation means that the residents get to own their own. We're taking back Douglas. In other words, I have sat down with Alika Samuels. I have sat down with all of her just last week. And they really want to see, this will be the first pilot program for resident management here. It's called Manhattan Valley Douglas Houses Resident Management Corporation. And so it's giving it back to the people. I believe that the people rule. That's just me. And I think that we need to sit down, get together, everybody. We have so many beautiful CBOs around here, and this is a rich place when it comes to knowledge. If the residents, every citizen here would get together, if we will all get together, we will be very powerful. We will be very powerful.
With that power, we have 4 people with their hands raised. So first was Pat, then Jay, then Deania, then Joyce. So Pat?
Hi, Carmen. So
Hi.
what would you do to ensure that we are building truly affordable housing instead of accessing tax breaks like 485X, the new 421A?
Yes. Let me tell you, Um, the pros on this on AI encourages property upgrades, right? The landlords are incentive to invest in significant improvements, ensuring that rental properties are maintained and modernized, which can prevent deterioration and affect whose benefit, both landlords, by potentially increasing the property's value and rental income, and tenants by enjoying better living conditions, benefits. Though the immediate financial gain is primarily the landlords, we have to make sure that, number one, we're sitting at that table. Because when they say affordable, it's affordable to who? Most of the people are talking about low income. And so when people talk about affordable, we need to watch that. We need to watch that, because there's a thing as low income. And then there's affordable housing. How affordable is it? And those are the words we need to start looking at to see what they mean. Because in the fine print, especially now here, when they tell us it's affordable housing, it's not affordable. It's not affordable for us. It's affordable to you. It's not affordable to us. So what I've done, we did a committee, and we're fighting HUD, and we're fighting NYCHA. While everywhere is getting privatized, they have not touched Douglas. They have not touched it. You know why? Because I went in and started fighting. And again, did the 501c3. We must look for the loopholes. The loopholes. We must look for that, where the loopholes are, and we must fill them up. There's no one answer. There's no one answer. There's too many catch-22s when it comes to affordable, when it comes to low income, and when it comes to the people that are running it.
So let's see if some of the other questions can focus that or work on that at all. So Jay, you're next.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. I'm happy to be your neighbor. I'm on 96th Street.
Hi, Jay.
I have a sort of strange question. How can we build a NYCHA residents and Mitchell-Lama residents coalition so we can exert more influence on what happens in Albany?
All we have to do is get it together, honey, Joe. Y'all tell me when and we do it, honey. One thing I am is I'm all action. I'm not talk. Some people talk, I don't. I walk the walk, and I walk that walk every day. I have 3,000 residents here. I have so many seniors in here in trouble. Before I came here, the pipes broke in 2 apartments. I'm running there. I also have the roofing being done. I'm messing with the contractors. I have the gas risers. They're getting done. So I'm with that. I'm everywhere. My hand stays on the pulse. And that's the thing. Your hand needs to be on the pulse. You need to know what's going on. I'm good for that. But let me tell you, Jay, you let me know when, and we'll get housing together. We have 205 presidents that are active right now, and we will do that. It's put it this way, it's overdue. It's overdue, because Mitchell-Lama is the bedrock of everything. Let me tell you, for my son to live in 700 right now, yeah, come on now.
Let's find a way to do it.
Let's do it. Let's
Okay.
do it.
And next we have Dinia.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad, 2 quick things. I'm glad you brought up the e-bikes situation. I am a biker. I ride my bike in Central Park. I took a class to make sure, being a responsible citizen, that I'm riding my bike within the law.
Mhm.
I can no longer do that. There's e-bikers riding against traffic and against other bikers. I used to go to Central Park and ride my bike. It's dangerous, and they don't even care that children are in the park. The problem is the reinforcement. How can we reinforce it? Cars get ticket I don't see any cops stopping e-bikers from doing what they're doing. And the other thing is that you have a lot of these delivery services like Pizza Hut or whatever, saying you got to deliver within 20 minutes or 10 minutes. And these young people are knocking people out of the way just so they don't lose whatever prices. So I wanted to see your idea about how we will reinforce that. And the other issue I have, and I understand you have grandchildren, children, and grandchildren. I don't have any children, but my nieces and nephews
That's right.
are earning now in the maybe 50, 60,000. They're not the new poor because they are being told you're earning too much for rent stabilization, but they cannot afford market rate. So where are they? Living with a grandmother.
That's right. And
So we criticize our young people for not growing up, but we're not giving them that opportunity. So I think with the housing situation, it's about looking. I know that we're doing things for people at a certain low level of income, but we're not doing anything for people earning 60,000 a year, 50,000 a year. They have become the new working poor.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get some ideas on how you think we could address those things.
Well, I think that, first of all, you're absolutely right. As I said, I have 3,000 residents here, and I think that grandmothers are the ones taking care of the children now. A lot of them. And we're not doing enough to support them. Rules were made to be what? Broken? That's what it is. We have a system that's broken, and they refuse to fix it. It's been so broken so long that they don't care. Not only that, we're not challenging them, and we're not challenging the people with enough that are in leadership to listen. Perfect example, right? I have a 24/7 fridge, right? I have a mentally ill woman that lives right here in 826. She has broken my refrigerator twice. What did it? She went in, she broke the doors, she broke the glass, NYCHA stuff. Do you know what I had to do to NYCHA? I had to threaten NYCHA. I said, because she's destroying federal property. So how are you not reporting her or trying to get her arrested? And the whole thing is really not, see, for me, the thing was when my refrigerator first got busted, I was tight. I was fit to be tied. But then I found out that she was mentally ill. So I said, you know what? Let's see if we can get her some help. Went to the 24th precinct, PSA 6, which I work with them closely all the time. And they were sleeping on the warrant. This woman came back the second time. She broke my thing again because rules were made to be broken. And that's what people believe. And that's not true. Rules were made to be followed. And our electors are not following it. People that are in charge are not following. Housing is not following it. The landlords are not following. And it's going to be up to us. And until we make that movement together, it's not going to happen. We got to challenge these people. We got to stop. Okay, all right. No. We have to challenge. We have to challenge them. I'm
going to challenge you just because it's getting late. So
okay, baby.
You made a really good point about enforcement and about the fact that we have to work together to do enforcement, and that's important. There's one more question, and then we're going to call it an evening.
You got it, my love.
Okay, so Joyce.
Yes, hello. Hello. So, Carmen, you know me, and I've been pushing hard for actually all of NYCHA to have equitable sanitation resources, which don't currently exist. And so we were working specifically at Douglas to get a composter because you're not part of the brown bin program
Right,
that
right.
sanitation runs, as well as another vegetable garden, and I know you have others, and that would do wonders for the environment and certainly improve sanitation.
Works.
And I think you know that the NYCHA administration refused a participatory budgeting project to be
Mhm.
able to fund such a program. But NYCHA also is not cooperating in an opportunity for millions of dollars to get proper recycling resources throughout the NYCHA universe, millions of dollars. So I don't know what's going on. And I always thought that funding was a big reason for the inequity in sanitation resources between NYCHA and private housing. So what are your ideas about, getting this organization to obtain the resources that it needs so that NYCHA residents have the same kind of recycling opportunities that the rest of the city has?
Joyce, first of all, we have to get away from NYCHA. That's A number one. That's why I created the 501c3. NYCHA has not done its job. It's not going to do its job. And again, we need to take over, and that's what I'm trying to do. We're not trying to do. I'm getting pretty close there. It's been 5 years since I've been fighting for ownership. And so right now, even New York City Housing Authority, HUD has actually they're giving me 2 different contracts, which are maintenance contracts. And the whole thing is that if we don't change NYCHA from the top up, it's not going to change. These people are bored already. The truth is the truth is the truth. And they're lining their pockets on our backs. And until we keep doing what we're doing, I mean, I'm gonna tell you the truth, they don't mess with me that much. They know better. They have given me they have really been giving me everything that I need. I just got a new truck, a new sanitation truck. Okay? And people are fighting for sanitation trucks. I just brought in sanitation trucks. Now I'm having my roofing done. Now I'm having my gaskets done. A lot of the other developments are not. But you have to be strong. And I know, and I thank you, Joyce, because you've been around for a long time with this, and I told you I would do whatever I can. And yes, I'm gonna still do whatever I can when I can. Because it's it's really important that we do this composting. And I will keep in touch, like I said, and we'll get it done. But the thing is, we gotta fight.
And we need the funds.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was so frustrating. I mean, we could have gotten it from the city council, and they said, we can't handle it.
Let me tell you something. Until we change all of these people, it's not going to happen. It's not. All these elected officials have not once come to Douglas. Not once. Adriana doesn't come here. Sean doesn't come here. Nobody comes here. Okay? So what is that saying to my residents?
All right.
But I'm looking forward to working with you.
For all of you, all the candidates have had their say this evening and answered questions. We've had Micah and Eli and Melissa and Carmen. And the election, the Democratic primary is June 25th. And then the regular election will be in November. So, and Danny is retiring. So we need one of these good people to be our next Democratic candidate for Assembly member in District 69. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating.